Hello and welcome to Friday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic, and today we've got a very interesting looking puzzle for you that's coming from Eric Dunn, and I think this will be interesting because both our tester and Mark have had a go and they both gave it some very good feedback. So and it looks interesting as well. It's beautifully set up. I'll talk you through the rules in a moment, but I just wanted to say firstly, if you're not a subscriber to the channel and you do watch our videos and enjoy them, please consider subscribing. There's a button down, I think it's down there on the screen. You just click on that in the bottom right hand corner and you should be able to just subscribe, and then you'll get alerted when our videos come up, which, as you probably know, is around 8:30 UK time every night. Now, how does this puzzle work? Well, we've done one puzzle that was similarly themed before, which had these circles in the grid, and that was by Bastien Vialgem. And the way this works is that these four squares have to contain the digits 5, 6, 8 and 9. So these four squares would have to contain 1, 2, 7 and 8, etc. Now, there's one more constraint in this puzzle, which is, let's put a 4 in there just to illustrate. If we had a 4 in this square, then knight's moves away from that square could not contain a 4. So that's a chess knight's move. So those 8 squares there could not contain a 4, as well obviously as all of the normal squares that couldn't contain a 4 because of the rows, columns and boxes. So there's an additional knight's move constraint here, and apart from that it's normal Sudoku. So I'm just going to sort my mouse out and then we will have a go. There we go. Seemed a good time to me to do a knight's move puzzle. We've got our Chess Sudoku app is out on the 2nd of March, I think. So do look out for that if you are interested in decent quality puzzles. Now, when I've done the only one of these I've ever done before, what you had to do was to compare content. You had to find common contents of boxes. So if we look at those two boxes, you can see they both contain a 2. So this means that in effect we need to look at column 3 and ask where a 2 can go in column 3. Now, because there must be a 2 in these 4 squares, there can't be a 2 in any of those squares. Similarly, there can't be a 2 in any of those squares. So we know in this block the 2 is in one of these 3 positions, and in fact we know it must be in one of those 2 positions. So we can pencil mark some 2s in there and move on. Now look, if we look over here we can do exactly the same thing with 9s. So we get some 9s there. Now, where should we look next? Let's look at the rows then. So here the common digit between these two sort of boxes, 2 by 2 boxes, is a 3. So we can put a 3 into one of those squares. Common digit up here is an 8, so an 8 into one of these 2 squares. And all the time we need to be bearing in mind things like, if we have pencil marked 8s here, neither of these 2 squares can now be an 8. Because if we try and put an 8 in this square, we would be eliminating 8s from both this square and this square because of the knight's move constraint. 7, 8. Right, okay, so what are we meant to do now? I see. So if we look at these pencil marked 3s here, there's no 3 in this 2 by 2 arrangement. So in fact that square is a 3, isn't it? So let's put that in. Now we've got the same thing there with the 8 as well. So that can't be an 8 after all, and we get an 8. So we've got an 8 and a 3 in the grid now. And this 8 means there's no 8 in any of those squares, but there's no 8 in this square because it's got to be a 2, 3, 6, 7. So the 8 is locked into one of 3 positions in the central 3 by 3. Okay. That's all very well, but it's not going to be enough to solve the puzzle. Now this square has, if we look at the commonality between these two circles, you can see this square must, I think, be a 2 or a 7, because it can't be a 1 and it can't be a 3. So this square is either 2 or 7. Now that is useful actually, because yes, it is. This square has the same restriction, look. This square can also only be a 2 or a 7. It's the only two common digits between this 2 by 2 and this 2 by 2. So that means these two squares are 3 and 6. Now, is that helpful? I'm sure it is. It will be at some point. I'm not sure it's immediately helpful. Let's try and do the same thing down here. Can we? So the common digits between this 2 by 2 and this 2 by 2, you can see, are 4 and 9. So this square must be a 4 or a 9. Same thing here, 4R. So okay, so we get a similar thing. We've got these two squares have got to be 5 or 8. And so far, what we've done at the top has sort of been mirrored by what we've got at the bottom. Now, if we look at these two squares, we know that must be a 1 in one of these 4 positions. So now that 1 must be there. And that is useful, look, because we know there's a 1 in one of these 4 positions. So it must be in one of those 2 squares. There must be a 1 in one of these 3 squares here. Now that means this square can't be a 1. Because of the knight's move constraint, we wouldn't only be able to rule out this square being a 1, but also these two would be a knight's move away from this square. So the 1 is locked into one of those 2 squares now. In fact, we've got the same thing here. Look, there must be a 1 in one of those 2, one of those 2, one of these 3. So this puzzle is very, very symmetrical. I'm not sure how long that will continue for, but at the moment, literally every piece of logic we've done up here or down here has been mirrored on the other side of the grid. Right, okay, so what do we do next? What's the next easy win? Here's something. If we look at these 2 squares now, we know they can't contain a 1. So these squares are, the only possibilities for them are 2, 7 and 8. Now I'm just wondering, because there's commonality, look, between these regions. Yeah, okay, so now these 2 squares have to be 1, 2 or 7, because they can't be 8. Now that forms a quadruple on the numbers 1, 2, 7 and 8. Which means the 8 in this 2 by 2 arrangement must be up there. So these squares must be 5, 6 or 9. We still haven't put a 3 or a 4. We know there's a 3 and a 4 in the yellow squares. Hang on. No, look at this square. That is beautiful. That's beautiful. This square is absolutely massive because of this 2-7 combination. Look at that. That is gorgeous. You can't put a 2 or a 7 in this square, because if you do, you're ruling out a 2. So let me show you. If I put a 2 in there, there could not be a 2 in this square or this square. And then this little 2 by 2 would be broken. It needs to contain a 2, and it couldn't. So this square can't be a 2 or a 7 and must be an 8. Wow. Now, does that really help? Yes, it does help us now. Oh yeah, it really helps us because we need to put an 8 in there, and there's now only one cell that can contain an 8. This one is a knight's move away, so it must go here. And you can see the moment I place that, I can put the pencil marked other numbers in. And now we're starting to cook with gas, aren't we? We're getting somewhere. Can't be a 7 in those two squares now. This square must be a 7. These two squares must be 1 and 2. Now there must be a 7 in one of those three squares at the bottom. And 8s are important because we can't put an 8 in this 2 by 2, so the 8 goes here. Now this, oh wow, now this square has to be a 5, this square has to be an 8. Let's put the 8 in there. Hang on a minute. Let me just have a quick... There's something odd going on here. Because the way we got into this logic here was noting that there was commonality. This was a 1, 2, 7, 8, 2 by 2, and this was a 1, 2, 7, 8, 2 by 2. Now I've just looked down here and noticed we've got 1, 3, 4, and 9. So this puzzle is totally symmetrical. This is very, very interesting. Look, so these squares have to be 3, 4, 9. These squares have to be 1, 4, 9. You can see again, we've now got a quadruple. This is very, very interesting. And this square has exactly the same profound impact on these two squares that this square had on these two squares. This can't be a 4 or a 9. This has to be a 3. So 3s and 8s are totally symmetrical. And what do I mean by that is if I rotate this square sort of around 180 degrees, I would arrive at this square. And you can see that the 3 and the 8 are interchangeable, if you like. This 3, if we rotate it around 180 degrees, we'd arrive at that square. And again, so if this is right, I very much suspect this square will have to be a 3. Now, can we prove that logically? I must be able to. Let's just continue with the logic here, though. So now we can get rid of 3 from this square. There must be a 3 in one of these two positions. Yeah, here again. We've got exactly the same. This, where do we put the 3 in this little quadruple? It must be here. 3, 1, 9, 4. So that 4s and 7s should be interchangeable, and indeed they look like they are, look. What an interesting puzzle. This must be a 3. I'm trying to remember the logic I did over there and invert it because it's just going to work, isn't it? And look at that. This 3 sees that one. That gives us a 6 and a 3 there, which is exactly what we were expecting. So, this is a very unusual situation. Now we can remove 4 from both of those squares. The 1, 9 therefore gives us the 4 here. That's not surprising because it's opposite a 7 that we've already fixed. These two squares are 1 and 9. Now you look, we've got 1, 9, 1, 9. So these two squares have got to be 1 and 9. That means this one is not a 7. And 2, 1, 2. So this has got to be a 1, 2 pair. Now, if we look at this one, we've still got to place a 4 and a 7 in this 3 by 3, so they must be vertically connected there. And by the same token, because I know the puzzle is symmetrical, I'm going to be able to write the 4 and the 7 down in the bottom left-hand box. That's going to put a 4 in one of those two squares. The 1 here, look, that fixes the 1 and the 2. That fixes the 1 and the 9. My phone's ringing. And the fact, then we're going to be able to do the same thing over here. Obviously, 1, 9 like that, 1, 2 like that. Now let me just try and spot an efficient way to continue. This square has to be a 5 or a 9. So if we look along here, we should get a similar restriction. 2, 6, 7. 4 here. 2, 3, 4. 3s. Must be a 3 in one of those squares. 2 here locks the 2 over onto the left hand side of this 2 by 2. Yeah, and the 7s look interact quite nicely on the central box. They force a 7 into one of those 2 squares, which forces the 7 into this square at the bottom. Now, given that we've just done that logic with the 7 and it worked nicely, we should be able to establish exactly the same things with its symmetrical counterpart, which is the 4. And indeed we can. So in fact they form a 4-7 pair in the central 3 by 3, and we should be able to put a 4 here. Now the 7, it's funny because when you miss something at the bottom and you find it at the top, it reminds you. So this 4 obviously is going to give us the 4 and the 7 that way round. 3 must be in one of these 2 squares. This can't be a 9. The 9's over there. I think I did. So what's opposite 9 in this? 9s and 2s interact with one another. Yes, and you can see I've got pencil mark 2s in the bottom left, pencil mark 9s in the same position in the top right. Okay, so we need to put... Now this 2 is rather nice in terms of its impact on the central box. It rules out that square, and because of the knight's move it rules out those 2 squares. That gives us those 2s, which forces a 2 into this position. Now there's a 2 in one of those 2 squares. Now 2s and 9s are symmetrically opposite, so this, you can see, has the same effect and gives us a lovely 2-9 pair in the central box and a 9 on the left hand side. So these squares now must be 1, 5 and 6 in some order. These 2 can't be 1 because of the ones like that. That gives us a 1 in the centre. So 5 and 6 are symmetrical counterparts. Okay. So let's just take a step back and try and spot something useful here. So I'm looking at this column. I can see I need 3, 5 and 9. So this square can only be 3 or 5. These 2 squares could be either or any of the 3 options. This 3 is very powerful though on that square. Gosh, I nearly missed that. So this one can't be a 9 because of the 9 here, but it can't be a 3 because of the knight's move. That gives us a 5. Now, by logic, we should therefore be able to prove that this is a 6 because of the symmetry of the puzzle. So let's check that. You can see we need 2, 6 and 8 into these positions. The 2 rules out, so this is a 6 or an 8, and the 8 there does force that to indeed be a 6. So this becomes a 6, 7 pair. This should be, what's that going to be, a 2, 8 pair. Now if we think about where 7 can go in this box, we can't put the 7 here, because if we try and put the 7 here, neither of those squares could be a 7. So the 7 must be in one of those 2 squares. What a lovely puzzle this is. It's absolutely beautiful. 3, 4. So we're going to get similar logic over on this side if we wanted to do it. But that's going to give us a 6 here, look. So this should be a 5, which it is. These 2 squares have got to be 7 and 8. This is a 5. This is a 6. And I think we're on the home straight now. We can put a 5 at the top. This must be a 9. 5 at the top means this is going to be a 6 because of this 6 here. So this, what's this going to be? 3 and 6 into those top squares. Now that rules out a 6 from this square because of the knight's move constraint. If we put a 6 here, neither of those squares could be a 6, so that must be a 5 now. This must be a 6. Now this square must be a 6 or an 8, and again it can't be a 6, so that's an 8. That's going to fix everything down this side. Square should be a 2. That fixes the 2 and the 9. The 1 and the 2 are fixed. It should be a 1 and a 9 now. These 2 squares are 5 and 8 in some order, and let's put that in like that. These 2 squares are 4 and 5 in some order. I'm just wondering about how, this 3, I was wondering how we were going to disambiguate these sort of dyads here, and it's this 3 that does it, look. It's seeing that square, so that must be the 9, that's a 3, that's a 3, that's a 6, that's a 6, that's a 9. So we're going to get something similar down here, aren't we? So it was this 3, so it's going to be this 8, and it is, it's that 8. That sees the 2 there, which fixes the 8 and the 5. Now where can a 5 go in this block? It can only go here. That means 5, 2, 3, 6, 3, 4, 4, 5, and I think we're done. What a lovely, lovely puzzle. Thank you very much, Eric, for creating that. Very original idea. Total symmetry in the grid. You can see the ones are symmetrical with each other, and apart from that, everything else has a counterpart that can be rotated 180 degrees to itself every time. So it's sort of, some people might think you only got half a puzzle today because we only had to do half the logic, but that logic was extremely beautiful. I love that. Come back tomorrow for another edition.